I'm Jim Zarzana, and author of two books, The Marco Dissident and Marco Triumphant. They're near future sci-fi, dystopian, and I'm going to do a little presentation tonight on getting started writing fiction. If you're a memoir writer, I think some of this will apply as well. Probably not if you're a poet. I don't mean to degrade poets, I'm married to one, but probably will help with fiction, and if you're writing some kind of historical, I think you can pick up some ideas. I have a lot of handouts, so I'm going to give you one that just gives you an overview, and I know her. I'm going to actually do some stuff I stole from her, but I admit it. I will tell you that I stole it from her. That's Faith Sullivan. If you could share with your partner. And if you could share with your partner. And as I said, if you came in late, some of you are getting these that say Watertown, because, which is, so 2, 4, 6. I usually have a lovely and talented assistant, but Mary Ann couldn't make it this evening. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over 5 steps: character development, plot notes, first and third person. Sorry, we're going to get into a little grammar. Should I whisper when I say that? Cliche, and active and passive voice grammar. Sorry, it's going to happen. And then work ethics, okay? And then I've got some tips about your writing career. I put this information on the board because I forgot I had it on the sheet. If you ever feel so inclined to email me, that's my Gmail address. I have a website that's more generic, www.jameszarzana.com, and my web director is sitting right over here in front. So there's a couple chapters of the book posted there. There's some poetry. I'm not really much of a poet, but I got a few poems there. There's some. I have a blog periodically. It's been a while since I've written a blog, but there's just some general information. The MarcoSaga.com is more tied to my writing specifically, and there's new stuff popping up on that roughly all the time. And for those of you that Facebook, the Marco Saga does have a Facebook page if you want timely and up-to-date information about that. I have wonderful, let me tell you, wonderful business cards and postcards designed, by Chelsea, who has a graphic design business and PR business, and I forgot them. So, but if you go online, you'll find all the same information. The key thing is that I am available to talk to book groups. I am available to talk to libraries. So if you're from another library system, or you know, your Aunt Hilda has a book group at a library not too far away, and you know, you want to put in a good word, there's ways that we can work this out. Actually, I'm shameless self-promoter, and I am going to be up at Alex in November, part of their NaNoWriMo. I'm going to be in Redwood in March, and I might be back in Wilmer in October. We're kind of working out the details. They wanted me to come a weekend. I'm going to be in Sweden, so couldn't do it. All right. So, this works, right? We just punch this. That's me, that's where we're at, that's the correct date, right? Is it 10/25th?
26th.
26th?
Close.
Close. How do I do this?
I think you do it on the
Do I have to turn it on?
Is it plugged into the
Computer.
No, it's in the computer. Oh, if I sit down, I'm not going to be able to get back up. I'm going to do this 52 times. Okay, little background on my career, how my career evolved and getting started. And it all starts with a love of reading. I disappointed so many students when I taught at Southwest who came to my classes, and I was not a creative writing faculty member. My specialty is actually British Lit. But I taught a lot of freshman comp, advanced comp, a lot of future teachers. And students would tell me, well, I don't need this stuff because I'm going to be a writer. I hate to disappoint you, but you know, I don't want to read books, I want to write books. Well, if you're not reading, you're not going to be a writer. So I don't want to be the one to tell you that. But I fell in love very early with writing. In my career, I was very fortunate. A few of you may recognize that as the reading room of the British Museum, and that's where Karl Marx did research, many other writers did research. I actually got to do research there for my dissertation, not for my novels, but I'm a little kid from the suburbs of Sacramento. I was told very early on in my life, you're never going to go to college, you're not very bright, join the Army right before the Vietnam War started, thank you very much, and did not happen. But, I pulled it off. So that's kind of my background in that sense. Love to read. And of course, I write sci-fi because I was in high school when that hit. And, even in the last few weeks or couple months, there's been a couple more spin-offs of that dynasty and movies and everything else. But I watched the first episode on our Zenith Color TV back in our family room. We never had the TV in the living room. It was always in the family room. And of course, I was in graduate school when that hit. And I was one of those people that stood in line and then bought tickets for the next show because they were sold out. And my brother and his fiancée at the time and I, the three of us, stood talking for 3 hours waiting to go in. And within the next week, I saw it 7 times. I mean, I was just totally fascinated by this movie. So that's kind of partly explains. So, no straight and easy path. I don't think anybody's ever is. I wanted to teach college, and it was at a time I graduated, please don't figure out my age, but I graduated in 1972, and that was kind of the last of the baby boomers, and the draft deferment had ended. So the numbers of people going to school, dropped way off, and they said, well, they'll never need college teachers. They're just not going to need it. Of course, demographically, these people, this is how smart some people are. They counted up all the young white men and said, that, well, there's not enough of them to go. They forgot to count the women or the minorities or returning students, and, people that fill up the ranks of our foreign students. So thank you very much. I was able to get a job. Anyway, I couldn't get into a 4-year PhD program. I had a good background. I was not a good student. I was one of those kinds, for those of you that teach, that should have done better but didn't. And I taught high school for a while, did all these kind of things, earned an MA finally from a very good school, something like Mankato State, Sac State, Sacramento, where I'm from. And eventually, I did get a chance to enroll at Notre Dame and did my PhD at the University of Notre Dame. So I really had 2 dreams. I always wanted to be a writer, and yet I wanted to teach college. As I got into college, I loved college, so I really put my eggs in the teaching college basket. And I finished my PhD, met my wife there, we got married on campus, the whole shebang. Our daughter's born in South Bend, Indiana, and taught all over the country, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and ended up here in 1989, retired 2 years ago. But I always wanted to write. So eventually, I've been here long enough that I earned a sabbatical. Now, it meant a semester without teaching. And so this is how, the naive mind works. I thought, I'm not going to teach from when summer school ends in the summer until January. I could write a novel in that time. And by December, the novel will be done. By February, I'll have an agent. By March, it'll be published. By May, I'll be rich and famous. And that'll be the end of it, And I just imagined walking in, you're in our department now, and having my letter of resignation and handing it on to the chair of my department and my dean, and who wasn't my dean then, and saying, that's it, I can resign because look at the national numbers. Well, it's not going to happen that way, okay? If you're here to be rich and famous, I don't know what to tell you, because it's probably not going to happen. Our generation had J.K. Rowling, that's it. I mean, I think, if that's your track, it's probably not going to happen. The thing is, you have a lot of fun. I mean, I'm having a hoot doing workshops like this writing. So, you know, if you're into all that, fine. But if you think it's rich and famous, probably. Do you remember the first Muppet movie where they finally get to Hollywood? And it's Orson Welles as a big movie director, and he gets the secretary. Miss Jones, send in the rich and famous contract for Kermit the Frog to sign. You know, I mean, it's not going to happen, okay? So, we're getting there. One more, I think, and then we're on to writing. So, Marco, how did Marco start out? This was going to be a slim little volume, going to be written quickly. I already went over this. I quickly realized it needed 2 novels for what I wanted to do because it's very sweeping. It's what they call a space opera in a lot of ways. And then I realized I needed to write a 3rd book because in the middle of these books, there's always a character writing a history of how Marco came to power called the Ascendancy of Marco. And I thought, well, duh, I got to write that book too. So what I thought would be a little 3 or 4 month project now is 3 novels. It just, be ready for this. You're going to write the memoirs of Aunt Hilda, and suddenly you got to do all the cousins and the uncles, and then, oh, there's a Civil War. Writing takes off on this, so be a little prepared for that. Next little thing. So, book 3, as I said, Ascendancy of Marco, very experimental. It's actually going to be the 4th book I publish now. And then in the summer of 2007, I knew I was still teaching full-time, trying to do all this while I was teaching full-time. I knew I was going to become the chair of the department, which is a lot of work. And so I thought, well, I want this 4th book, the draft of this 4th book done. And I actually wrote the first draft of that one in 3 months, the summer before I became chair. And that sat there until 2 years ago. Okay, so a couple things. Novels are organic. They're going to grow on you. You start to write. You start to put ideas down, it's just going to start spinning out on you. Like I said, the first book quickly became 2 books, and they're not going to be published in the order that I published them. I have the draft of all 4 novels done, and I was still going back and putting chapters in book 1, because I had a major character that didn't show up on the page till more than halfway through book 1, and I thought, no, I've got to get him in earlier. So if you've ever read the book, you get to chapter 9, and a character's introduced named Zot. That was the last chapter I wrote. So I wrote 4 books and then went back and stuck that one in. So this is gonna be part of what you're getting used to. Okay, I'm just gonna skip over the history of all this sort of stuff and get to Stephen King. Right? If you want to be a writer, you must do 2 things above all others. Read a lot, write a lot. I have a dozen outlines for novels. Probably 3 I'm seriously working on besides the Marco. And the reason for that, again, is once you start to work, things just come up. Your minds are very fertile. That's why computers are so wonderful. I've met a few people that are still handwriting and are still keeping spiral notebooks. And, that's fine. You can do that. But, you're working on a computer. Got one down there if you don't know what a computer looks like. And, you've set up a file and you keep all your notes in a file. It's just, and go ahead, keep reading and read widely. Don't just read in the genre you want to write. Actually, I read very little sci-fi, just FYI. Okay, 5 tips. Ray Bradbury says, by the way, you only fail if you stop. So, handout number 1. Characters. Characters. Good literature is driven by characters. If your readers don't like your characters, if you don't like your characters. Now, you may have created a nefarious character and you don't like aspects of your character. But if you're writing along and you're going, this guy or gal or dog or whatever you're writing just doesn't work, you're not writing a very good character. I have villains because I'm killing off people and having... Mine's all set on Earth and the inner solar system, but there's revolutions and, crazy people. I have handouts, not with the slides, but Character development. Yep. This is the one, I'm trying to make sure, this is the one that I you want to pass it on?
I mean, I'm not as lovely as Mary Ann, but
Well,
I can help.
I do want you to know that the author of this book did a workshop, but her name is Faith Sullivan, and I stole this character idea from her. Not stole it because I'm acknowledging it. Stealing it's when you don't acknowledge it. Faith came and did a workshop, gosh, after I started the books, because I didn't do this at the beginning. I mean, I'll tell you all the mistakes I made, and you don't want to do some of these ugly mistakes. Anyway, characters drive good fiction. There's nothing the matter with reading pulp fiction, what we call pulp fiction. There's nothing the matter with watching a sitcom. But you know, those characters never change, you know, episode to episode. You read some characters in some books, and maybe it's just a single book, but they just don't change. And what you want is a character that grows and develops. And so you want a character that is richly formed in your mind, even if you have stuff in your notes that never gets into the novel. So you want to do a lot of background work. Now, I didn't do this with some of my characters, probably first 10 characters that I had. So I was writing, and I needed a character, and then I had to stop and think of a name. And then I had to think of a way to describe her or him, and all kinds of things. So characters, myth number one, just some stuff here about writers have full control over their story and can write characters however they want. One of my major characters, the same one that I had to go back and insert him, write a chapter for him and put him in chapter 9, his name is Zarzana. In my original concept, he was a 12-year-old boy. And he just kind of looked at me and said, I'm a man, and I'm not going to stand, you're not going to write a book about me growing up, and I'm in love with her, so please, I can't be 12, all right? You know, I mean, now, it's quite all right. Marianne has the 1-800 number if I really go off my nut. But, you know, I mean, these people are alive to me, and your character should be alive to you, and you should see them and that. So good character, they can't be controlled because you start to put them into the mix, and they're going to want to do things. And that's cool. I mean, to me, that's a lot of the fun. Writers can see their characters in their head, and you simply write them down. The characters have control of the story, not the writer. So what I gave you, where am I? Pre-draft your characters, all right? There's a little girl writing. That's fun. Note to self, handout number 1 goes here. Oh, I'm already on the 2. We'll go back. So, do you have extras? There you are. So, character development. Gee, from Watertown. I've got one that says Watertown. I use a page. I set up a page with all these, I guess it's on the back, all of these black headlines, you know, bold headlines there. And then this is from one of the sci-fi books I'm working on that's much more shoot 'em up, space opera, several galaxies, not galaxies, solar systems. But I want to know what my characters look like. They're in the military, so I have to know their full rank. Family connections. This is a novel that's going to be about, there's an emperor, and then some of the royal family want to have a parliamentary, sort of like England, government, and then some want to lop off the emperor and take over and be more emperor than the emperor, so there's all this family tension and whatnot. So I put things, you know, date of birth. I put the home planet, which you don't need to do if you're writing about Marshall, Minnesota. But I mean, I have created 12 or 15 planets. How tall he is, what he looks like, his education. So you draw up your own list, but you can use something like this and, you know, play with them. You know, I'm doing this with all of my characters, and when I'm sort of between projects, and you know, I go to a novel I'm not even working on. Well, what is this character? What does she look like? Who does she fall in love with? What color of her eyes? Little expressions that she uses. And it's all stuff that none of it, all of it, I mean, some of it will end up in there, but not all of it. But you have a thorough grasp of this character. Date of birth. And again, this is what Faith Sullivan taught. Now what she does is that she takes a blank sheet of paper and she puts the name of the character in the middle and then just starts drawing off ideas and just, makes like a spider web of all these ideas connected to the character. So there's really no one way to do it. What I'm suggesting is you do it, that you have a real grasp of all your characters before you start writing. Because if you don't know what they're like and they start to interact, you're kind of on the run. There is a sort of I'm spontaneous, I'm a writer aspect, which is like walking into your kitchen, I'm spontaneous, I'm a cook, and you haven't laid out the ingredients or what pans you have or does the stove work, and there's something to be said for defrosting the roast and things like that. So, I mean, there's aspects of cooking, fine cooking, that's just a flair, and we could just whip this together, crack a few eggs, you got an omelet, and there's the let's sit down and prepare this and make sure we've got everything, and then when I go to cook it, it's all going to go smoothly. I don't think you ever lose your spontaneity for writing by doing this. I don't ever lose my spontaneity for writing. When I sit down to write a chapter, it's spontaneous, even though I have a clearer idea of what I want my characters to be like. Okay? So, anyway, you can see I've got a couple nicknames. What is this guy's nickname? Is Thunderer. He's a great general. And I thought, I'm gonna hook it up a little bit. This one's gonna be a little, I don't want to say tongue-in-cheek, but the Marco sagas are all pretty heavy political sci-fi. This one's be a little bit lighter. So anyway, I have on the front page, I say some slang down there. Again, I got that from Dickens. Dickens, you read Dickens, and there's always a little catchphrase with his characters. Barkis is willing, if you've read David Copperfield. You're rubbing your hands. Uriah Heep, your humble servant, and Uriah Heep is stealing all this money from people. I just read the book for you. But all of these kinds of things, and in the Augustan novels that I've got, that's what I call this other sci-fi. There's a character who's like an aide-de-camp for a big general, he's related to the emperor, he's big, and every time this general gives this aide a command, the guy says, "Okay, Commander." He's very informal. "Okay, Commander." And I'm amused by it, and I'm just hoping my readers are too. Evidently, you guys aren't, but I think that's a little thing you can do. So, your characters. My answer to every technical problem on my computer is always, just play with it. Just hit a few keys. You can kind of figure it out, especially Microsoft. It gets to be pretty intuitive. And that's what I say with your characters. Just play with them. Sit down, give them a name. Do you like the name? A nickname, something about them, and really get a sense of a rich, full character. Don't plan on putting all that in the book. You may find out you got 2 books there. Nothing wrong with that. And so you have a real sense of that. Okay, next one. Plot. Step 2. Know where you're going. Again, I did not do this with Marco. I didn't play around with the characters. I just started writing, and I got into about 4 or 5 chapters, and I thought, well, I think I know where this is going, and that's when I started to write a chapter outline. Every novel needs a plot, okay? We've had it. The world has Finnegan's Wake. We don't need another novel that goes on with 9 different languages that nobody can read. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, I read that in graduate school." Nobody's read it. Okay, Joyce made his living on. We didn't really make a living off it. You have to know where you're going. And I'm a strong advocate of an outline. There's nothing the matter with sitting down and having an outline. It's a working outline. You can ditch parts of it at any time. It will tell you as you're writing it, this isn't going to work, it would be better to go this way. I'm finishing editing book 3, and the final 4 chapters, I had to write them from scratch. I got to the end and where the characters were going, there was no way my first draft of the way I ended that novel was going to work. And I ended up writing 4 fresh chapters to end book 3. And I keep telling Mary Ann, I just love it. These are so good. You gotta, I'll get to this one in a minute. You gotta believe in yourself as you're doing this. It sounds arrogant a little bit, I realize. But anyway, you need a plot. Not everybody agrees with that. Not every writer agrees with that. But you need a plot. Cider House? Is that John Updike? No. Irving. I heard John Irving at a big, when he gives a talk, it's in a ballroom and 5,000 people listen. You know, he gets a substantial chunk of change for that. He gave this wonderful talk. Do you know he writes his books backwards? He writes the last chapter so he knows where everybody has to end up. And then he writes the second to last and the third to, and he writes the novel backwards. Now he still uses the convention of English and he doesn't reverse the way the words go on the page, but you know, when you think about, now every writer is going to do things differently, and you know, you can have your own system and, you know, chuck this stuff, it's good scratch paper, I guess, but you need to know where you're going. And there is a degree of spontaneity. Characters come to your mind. Most of my stories start out with characters in my mind, and then I say, okay, where are they going? And then the plot, then the setting, and then the plot develops. But I like to plot things out. My plotting is very general, but it can get specific after a while. Free writing is great when you're writing letters, you're writing love letters, when you write your journal, but you're a wordsmith, and your plot can be kind of free writing. It, you know, don't worry about grammar and spelling. You know, nobody's going to see this outline. You know, if you get a copy of a Dickens novel, and it's by Penguin, which is a press, and they put out academic editions, you know, so they have notes and all this sort of stuff. They often have Dickens' outline for that book, and you know, he didn't write everything down, but he would say, chapter 6, you know, Pip has to do this. Chapter 7 enters this guy. You know, chapter 8, Estella comes. You know, and he would know where he was going. Because he was writing those and publishing them as he went, right? You know, so he couldn't rewrite the last 4 chapters like I did because he's already, you know, ginning that stuff out. So you need a plot. You need to know where you're going. And the benefits of this. You know where you're going. You can noodle about the action before you really start writing it, so that you aren't writing a couple hundred words, and there are more than that sometimes, a whole chapter, and then change your mind. You can do that conceptually. You can discover things about your characters and the action before the thick of the writing. You know, it's easier to think these things out. Now, believe me, editing is editing. You're gonna save half of what you write if you're lucky, half of your first draft. But don't worry about that. But I do think it makes it easier for you. Like I said, I didn't do this with the first book. I got through most of the way through the first Marco book before I knew what I was doing. But always be fluid. Always be ready to change your mind. Like I said, 4 chapters. My chapters run about 25 pages. That's 100 pages. The book's 700 pages long. So 100 of 7, 1/7 of the book. I had to rewrite 1/7 of the book. I can't do the math quickly enough to tell me what percentage that is, but you know, you got to be prepared for this. But it's because my characters and the previous actions push the book in a different direction. So you want to be fluid, but you want to know where you're going, which I realize is a conflict, but you can't quite be both. Just in case you never saw writers at work before, I had that slide for another presentation. Oh, I like that slide. There's Willow, Catherine, and Roald Dahl. You know Matilda and all that. Here's my second handout. I'll take one of the bottom ones. I won't give you a quiz on book 1 of the Marco Saga, but if you've read book 1 of the Marco Saga, this outline doesn't represent what ends up in the book. But it was my rough outline from early on, and anything that's in italics is what's important. because I had this big long paragraph at the top, which is just my putting down into myself the pre-sense of how this Marsco world came to be. So I say to you guys, all the stuff I want you to know, I put in italics. Note, I let this information come out in bits and pieces through the first several chapters, no data dumps. You know, when you have to have a whether you're writing about Marshall, Minnesota in 1979, or you're writing about life on the far side of the moon, you know, a colony, space colony, or you're writing about pioneers and Laura Ingalls Wilder was your next door neighbor, whatever, you still have to give background. And you have to know that background, and your readers have to know that background, but you don't want to just stop and write background. You want to let that come out gradually. So that's what that italics note there says to me. I got all this information. In fact, I had so much information, I was able to write a book. You know, the fourth book, what will be the published fourth book, is all the background of Marsco, published as. So there's two main characters that I introduced in the first two chapters, Tessa Miller, Father Walter. A little note here, I changed the name partway through. Another note, after book 1 and 2 were finished, I realized I needed to be more direct with the introduction of Zot, so I inserted a chapter. Because Zot's talked about, Zot and Tess are lovers, and it's not working out so well, and then he doesn't appear for the longest time, and I thought, no, I've got to get him in here, so that's why I went back. No, over time, these proposed chapters became 4 chapters. I thought I could get all this into 2 chapters. I started writing it. Oops. I am a bit prolix, I think is the word. I talk a lot. So it doesn't surprise me that I do that. Then in the back, I got some information there about what was going to be in chapter 3, the Piazzi, which is the space shuttle, and this plot. These guys are going to try to attack Marsco, and it looks like there's going to do one thing, but then it goes off another way. Foreshadowing helps, I remind you. And then what I thought would take me up through chapter 5 ended up taking me 1 through 8 to actually get it all out. Then I go into chapter 6, which is now really chapter 10, what I thought was going to be chapter 10. So you want to know where you're going. You want to have a plan. Now again, if you're writing memoir, it's the same thing. What part of my aunt's story when she came from St. Louis to Minnesota in the Great Depression do I want to tell? I have to tell a little bit about the Great Depression. Was she here during the sandstorms? You know, the black dust came this far north. You know, it was worse down in Kansas and that area. But, you know, you want to have a sense before you write it all out. You know, and you can do a little of both, but I would know your characters and know where you're going with your plot before you really start your writing. Okay? To me, characters drive the plot, and you need a good plot. Now, the rest of this evening, you'll be happy to know, is technical. It's grammar. But you want to know this stuff. There won't be a quiz. I'm going to send you home with homework. We have to talk about narrative stance. Now, this drives people crazy, and it shouldn't. Because we're going to talk about first and third person narration, but when we line things up, and there's 2 of them, it's usually first and second. What the heck happened to second? We went from first to third. You don't even do that in baseball. You know, you have to go to second. Well, I'll give you the quick and dirty. There are 3 persons. First person is I, second person you, third person he, she, or it. But we never write in the you. We only write in first and third person. So you're either writing I, or you're writing he, she, they. Okay? Now, why care about that? Because there's nobody in this room, because you're all experienced writers. Inexperienced writers jump between the 2 like they're the same. which is like jumping between Apple, an iPhone and an Android as though they're the same, or your Apple laptop and your other brand. Is this an Apple? Just curious. No. I don't do apples. In pies, yes. So like if you think, oh, that was a great workshop, what can I do for them? Apple pie. Homemade apple. Lesson. Anyway, first person and third person. When do I give out my hand? Let me check. Also called, dang, I knew there was going to be a quiz sooner or later. I have this sense that I'm really funny, so I put these jokes in. I amuse myself, but not necessarily. All right, quick and dirty. The distinction between first person and third person narration, narrative voice. Joking aside, this is serious stuff because you can't jump back and forth. You've read papers like that, haven't you? Yeah. And you don't know what to say to the student, except for you started, being all green, and now you're orange, and now you're back to green, and you got to be one or the other. So you've all read To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Scout is a character in To Kill a Mockingbird, and she is the narrator, but she is not Harper Lee. Harper Lee wrote the story by having Scout tell us the story. This is going to be broadcast through Marshall TV, and I just helped a bunch of 9th grade English teachers at Marshall High teach To Kill a Mockingbird, because I think they still read it in first year. Harry Potter is a third-person novel. Now, the narrator exists outside the plot. There are some first-person in very few aspects. There's letters, there's overheard conversations, that sort of stuff. But by and large, this story is told from a voice that is never a character telling us directly, the way Scout is telling us the story directly. When you read J.K. Rowling's novel, you don't sit back and say, did she go to Hogwarts? How did she know all this? You know she invented, what a genius. You know she invented all this stuff. But we have a consistent point of view. All right? Now I say this because often I give this workshop to groups that are really beginning writers. I'm just looking around the room and I'm thinking we've got some experienced writers in here. So you probably have crossed this bridge already. But if you ask a typical group of beginning writers to write a story, they almost always start in first person. They almost always give you a story in first person. Because it's comfortable. And you know what? Most of their lives are not that interesting, and they try to disguise their lives as fiction. And so you want to create characters and have plots that go way beyond that. Our lives are not that interesting, okay? It's just not. We're not, not like J.K. Rowling. She went to Hogwarts after all, and she can whip out her wand. So, first and third person. And as you, as writers, want to know the difference, call me Ishmael, for those of you that read Moby Dick. First person, these are the strengths. A character, or sometimes characters, because you get some sophisticated people, they have more than one character doing this, tell us the story in turn. They can offer, it's usually he or she, I'll just say she, can offer a judgment on the action. Because she knows it, she's right there. But she's a character. She didn't write the book, she didn't live the book. There's an author sitting somewhere writing this down through this character. But since the character has witnessed it, they know it firsthand and they know it immediately. You have a sense when you read a first-person book, a well-done first-person book, and there are lots of them, that you really are part of the action, because I use the example of Paul, the narrator in All Quiet on the Western Front, is telling us this story. And we're in the trenches when the French are bombarding them, and these guys are German. And we're there when he has to put on his gas mask. And we're there when he stabs that poor French soldier and watches him die in no man's land. A horrible scene. Well done, but horrible scene. There's an immediacy to the plot. and the characters. It all seems fresh. So, those are some of the strengths of first person. If you know your Jane Eyre, I just wrecked it for you if you don't. Reader, I married him, she tells us the story. It can be biased. A popular form of the novel, this can be a good or bad thing. Since 1945, roughly, is we have narrators that aren't always telling us the truth. And that's pretty sophisticated. It's hard to do. The narrator knows what's going on. I mean, the narrator doesn't know what's going on. The author, and we as readers can figure it out. The narrator may not know the whole story, so there's gaps. That's a problem. And the author sometimes uses awkward techniques, you know. The character says, oh, I was puzzled at what was happening at Linda's, and suddenly Linda's roommate appeared, and she told me, you know, and she fills you in on what's happening at Linda's, you know. It just can seem contrived. Now, that's usually in the hands of a less experienced author. So there can be some weaknesses. Now, let's face it, if you're good and you're on game, these things evaporate. But just be aware of them. You say, okay, do I want to write in first person or third person? Why? Here are the strengths, here are the weaknesses. Other forms of first person can take. Remember, first person is using the first person pronoun I. That's where it gets its name. But the I is not the author. The I is a created character. If you're ever reading anything where the I is the author, you're reading an essay, not a novel. First person can crop up in various forms. A collection of letters or journals, and we call that an epistolary novel. Remember at one time, we were all kids, we used to call them the Epistle of St. Paul. Now it's the letter of St. Paul. Epistle is just a Greek word for letter. A journal, it could be a novel that looks like a journal, and we carried that over to Star Trek, right? Captain's log, you know, Stardate, Captain's log, you know, there's a reason why they did that. It's a long literary tradition of creating reality. How do you create reality with sci-fi? Create reality of making it look like this was started out as a document. And there's a lot of unreliable narrators out there, and the author is damn refined and knows what he or she is doing and creates a narrator that we don't trust. My favorite example of this is Remains of the Day. If you haven't read the book, it's a wonderful movie. Have you seen the movie? Now I can't remember the actors and actresses, but it's about 25 years old. I know Christopher Reeve is before his accident, so he plays an American set in Britain. But in the book, the narrator is a butler to a fella who was British, upper class British, not in the British government, and he's collaborating with the Nazis. And the butler can't figure it out. And the butlers tell, well, Ribbentrop came to tea, and they're talking to the prime minister, and, you know, they're selling out Czechoslovakia. Don't get on the plane, you know. Chamberlain, don't go to Munich. And, you know, and the narrator doesn't get it. Well, we get it. We know enough history. If not, we can wiki it pretty quickly and figure it out, right? So sometimes you want a narrator who isn't telling us the truth. That is very hard to do, right? To separate what you know as a writer to be the truth, have your narrator tell a lie and have it told in such a way that the readers can figure it out. You know, try that. If you have little kids, you do this all the time. Yes, Santa Claus is going to come, right? But on the other hand, do that for 400 pages. You know, there's a good reason why finally you tell the kids, there is no Santa.
Yeah.
Yep. Anthony Hopkins and Emma
Thompson.
Emma Thompson. That's right.
Just in case it's bugging anybody.
Yeah, you probably have copies here. Did that not click? Yeah, it did not click. How am I doing? Ah, pick it up, see? Hot potato. So, some bits of sage wisdom from Zarzana about first-person narration. It can work. We have wonderful examples. Remains of the Day, All Quiet on the Western Front, To Kill a Mockingbird. It's tremendously difficult to maintain. I've tried to do some stuff, and personally, I just after a while, it doesn't work for me. I do bits and pieces, but not. Too often, inexperienced writers tend to dive into it because they're comfortable with it. You know, you just have to say, I did this, I saw this. They don't think out the ramification. If you want to try it, I would say try it with something short. If you're doing a longer piece, sometimes you just have to explain, how did this piece come into being? You know, how did a 400-page novel come into being? There's got to be, you know, some reason. And never disguise your life as fiction by writing it as first person. Our lives are probably just not that interesting. All right, third person. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. The strengths of third person. This is the one that the author tells the story outside the story. I had one graduate professor one time describe this many, many years ago like God floating over the waters of creation. You know, just the author is there. No one questions that the author is there. And the author tells, it's a broader point of view. The narration can move from different locations. War and Peace, for example, follows, what, 5 or 6 different families throughout its 1,200 pages in length, or 1,400. It's unbiased because there's only the story. You know, now individual characters can lie to other characters in the story, but the story itself is telling you the story, you know. The narration can move into the minds of many characters, and so sometimes we get the same scene from different points of view, which is impossible to do when you're in first person, unless the narrative stance is switching from one character to another, and then the reader is dizzy. Is that I, Emily, or is that I, Josephine, or is that I, you know, because you're telling from all different things. So third person allows you to do that. Meanwhile, Emily in the corner was thinking that, you know, whatever. So we've all seen different things like that. There's less emotional contact. These are the weaknesses. This is a story of one ocean and two ships. I just want to show off that I read a lot of books. It's a great book. It's a great war story. I'll think of it in a second. The ocean. Anyway. The no emotional connection with the narrator. The narrator's never there. You know, if Emily's telling us the story, then Emily says, oh, I have a heartthrob for him, and we can kind of feel that heartthrob. If Emily's in love with, you know, Captain Bennick here, and the narrator's off somewhere else, we can see that happening. The narrator's told us that's happening, but we don't necessarily feel Emily's throbbing heart and shortened breath, you know, that you would have if it's told in first person. Technically, the narrator's outside the text, so the narrator, we don't ever get anything like that. It can be less immediate. It better be if it's third person in past tense, right? This happened and this happened. If it's third person present tense, how the heck did this thing get written, you know? The text can seem far away. It can seem stilted. Third person can be stilted. You know, you're talking about death or love or childbirth or something, and from this third person distant, it can be a bit stilted. So one isn't right and one isn't wrong. As a writer, you just need to know the difference and stick to one, although there are hybrids, and, you know what you're doing. So there's all kinds of hybrids. Realize, of course, when Dickens wrote Bleak House, many people, I included, would count Bleak House as one of his best books. You know, he was on game. But, you know, if you're reading along, there's a couple passages of third person, and then Esther Summerson, a character, is asked to record her life. And she even says, I don't know why, I don't know who's going to read this, I don't know why, but here's my story. And then it goes back to third person, Dickens outside the book telling us what happened, and then here's Esther telling us this, and then finally at the end, the two stories come together. And you don't know that that's going to happen at the beginning. So, okay, that's a graduate level plot, okay? Okay, I wouldn't try that one on Tuesday afternoon when you get done here, or Tuesday night. Changing Places is hysterically funny if you know a little something about the 70s, but it does, for a while it's in third person, for a while it's in first person, for a while it's newspaper headlines and articles, for a while it's a movie script. It just plays with all the ways that you know, you can write a novel, and then they're English professors in this story, and one of them's teaching writing, and he's using a book that says there are 3 ways to write a novel. Some novels end happy, some novels end sad, and some novels don't end at all. The beginning writer is encouraged to write a happy novel, and not a novel that doesn't end at all. As an English professor and a writer, I thought that was hysterically funny. So anyway, that's that. The Martian, almost all first person. If I have time, I'll tell you the history of that book, by the way, if you're interested in self-publishing. But it's almost all first person, and then suddenly we know what's going on in Earth. The Ascendancy of Marco, my book, the 4th book, 14 voices are going to be, all these different pieces are going to tell the story like a mosaic, because no one can understand how Marco did this. So, really, in writing, there are no rules. I hate to be the one to tell you this. Now, when you're driving home, there are rules, okay? How you relate to your spouses and your children and all that, there are rules, you know. How you treat the laws of Marshall, Minnesota, the IRS, there are rules. But in writing, really, if it works and you can pull it off, there are no rules. I mean, the rule is if it works. But I wouldn't break narrative unless you knew what you were doing. I'm not saying none of us know, you know, can't do this. You could be the next one to do this. But I would do this last. So first person gives you some things and some weaknesses. Third person gives you some things and some weaknesses. Second person is you, and it sounds like you're, you know, giving a sermon. You know, you shouldn't do it. So stay out of third person. Okay? I think I got a handout on this. Oh, another handout. This just, I'll keep that when you pass up. This just basically reviews what I went over, so you can read it later. And then you can treat this as homework. I used to be a professor, but just take a second and think about this. You've got a scene where there's a young man and a young woman walking, and another young woman or woman trailing behind. Now you could tell that from 3 different ways. The young woman telling the story, the young man telling the story, and if she's telling the story, she doesn't really know what he's thinking. If he's telling the story, he really doesn't know what she's thinking. All right? I won't get into any comments about men and women and how they think. But the observer of those two doesn't know what either of them are thinking. And then if you write it in third person, you could know what all of them are thinking. You know? So that's the difference between, so you gain a lot and lose a lot depending on how you do it. All right? So that's pretty much on that. I'm going to speed this up. As I said, I would go 75 minutes, and I've got 18 more minutes. Step 4. Close the grammar again. Vocabulary, cliche, and tone. Vocabulary should always be appropriate to what you're doing. So, you're writing a young A novel, probably not going to drop the F-bomb. Young adult, YA young adult. Hot, they make a lot of money, you're a good young YA novelist, right? Every junior high teacher in America is, you know, reading stuff. You don't want to necessarily dumb down the language, but you need appropriate language. Same holds true with cursing and vulgar terms. If you're writing a real gritty foxhole World War II novel, you probably aren't going to have these people talking like they're at afternoon tea, right? Death trap words, there's a whole slew of words that are useless suddenly. Just stay away from it. Go to Google, put in Billy Collins, that's the name of a poet, suddenly, and read his poem, Suddenly. You know that? Suddenly, There was a gunshot in the night, and suddenly, and you have to have your action and your dialogue create that intimacy. You want to write with strong subjects and predicates. I have this on a handout, so you don't need to write all this down. You can if you wish, but starting a sentence with there are, this is, things are, people are, useless. You want strong subjects and predicates. But the big one is, the hard one. I've got a handout for a lot of this. Active and passive voice. I am sorry, this is grammar. You want to write in active voice. Passive voice kills everything. It is evasive. You get letters from people who are snarky, telling you things in passive voice because there's no ownership to what's being said in passive voice. So I'm going to give you a handout. I got to refresh myself as what. Oh, no, that's the next one. Okay. Active and passive. There you go. So active voice, as the name implies, describes the relationship of the subject to the predicate, the subject to the verb. And active voice, the subject is doing the action of the verb. So my example on the handout is, the lion ate the deer. Simple, simplistic example. Passive voice was, an example is, the deer was eaten by the lion. Now there you have a deer, it's being acted upon by, in this case, an object of a preposition. I won't get into how weak an object of a preposition is, but all objects of prepositions and prepositional phrases can be removed from a sentence, you still have a sentence. You can't remove a subject, you can't remove a verb, you can remove a prepositional phrase, they're that unimportant. And you want this magnificent lion who's devouring a deer removed from the sentence. The deer was eaten is a sentence. We don't know who ate it. Did it die and ants ate it? Was it too close to the crop circles and the aliens came down and ate it? We don't know. The lion ate the deer, we know what the heck's going on. So active voice. Active voice. Always want to write in active voice. Again, beginning writers are all over the place because they don't see a difference between active or passive. It's like a pitcher who sort of knows how to throw a curveball and sort of knows how to throw a fastball. You know what you call those kind of pitchers? The batting practice pitcher. Because they have no control over what they're doing. They sort of know that the catcher's over there and they got to throw the ball. You know the difference between a curveball and a slider and a fastball. You're on the Cubs, you're going to the World Series again. And that's the difference. And so, know the difference. So I give you some explanations and very thorough hours of teaching all this sort of stuff. And then the next page, either the back page or the next page of this, is all about words that are useless. I'm skipping through that active and passive very quickly, but go back and read it and look at your own writing. Passive always takes a verb to be as an auxiliary, so there's always more than one verb to make it do that. It's not past tense. Past tense means it happened in the past. The lion ate the deer. That means it's not eating it right now. It was yesterday, ate the deer. But here are words that are useless. Basically, though, impossibly, or impossible. There is, there are. I think I had to write one sentence in the Marco Dissident. I couldn't get around using there is one time in a 700-page novel. I struggle, even in my journal, when I write my journal, if I write a there is sentence or a there are, I go back and delete it and write that again. It's just useless, useless. Whenever possible, stop using the verb to be as a main verb. She is tall. Is the main verb. She stood tall. She grew tall. Now you got action. Stood, grow. Any word that you're used to seeing in a romance novel, I pronounce it mauve. Sorry. Only if you're being tongue-in-cheek. French words, what English words will do now, there are some that you have to do. Really, really, really means nothing. Really, it really. Good, bad, ugly, pretty, nice, a lot of, please spell it right, not a lot. Avoid cliches, you know what you're talking about. Avoid cliches like the plague. Now, again, you could have a character that's one of the things that they love to do is talk in cliches. So anything you put in the mouth of characters is fair game. I wouldn't put there is or anything like that because that just is taking up space on the page. But if you wanted to seem like they're, they don't know how to get this sentence out, and well, and they're looking for, what, maybe. So, are there rules? No. There are no. I'm giving you rules, but there are no rules. Whatever works. But in dialogue, you can get away with much more. Not a lot of, but much more. Dark and stormy night. Very useless. Don't even say that to your spouse. That was a very good meal. Please, it was an excellent meal. Let's tweak this up a bit. She was very brave. She was brave. That covers it. He was very rude. Boy, we have other words for that. He was yeah, okay, I'm on TV. I got to watch. Well, unless you're talking about water, well is probably useless. Okay? Dark and stormy night. Well, now, pep talk. Very quickly. Step 5. Write because you love it. As I said, I got 10 minutes. I can do this. Not because you think you're going to, and I can stay after. It's a long game. Writing a novel is a long game. A long game. Don't think it's a short game. Don't think you're going to do this quickly. Writing takes months, if not years. It's not an occupation for the faint-hearted, which I know is a cliche. Or the recklessly spontaneous. You're never going to get there. All writing is revision. Throw away this notion that whatever hits the page is going to stay on the page because you have to write and revise and revise. Probably 40 revisions of each of those books. At least 40 revisions. Invest in your work. If you have something that you think is good, and if you have something, self-publishing is so easy now. You have something you think you're going to self-publish. Hire a professional editor. A real they're going to cost you probably a lot of money. But you don't want to put something out there just because you can do it. We could all do all kinds of crazy things, run down Main Street, throw rocks through windows. We could all do that. We're all physically capable of doing that. It's not a good idea. Go to the police parking lot, slash tires. We are all physically capable of doing that. Not a good idea. You could write something tomorrow and have it online Thursday afternoon. The capability is there. Not a good idea. Okay? So, invest, professional copy editor. I should do another workshop sometime just on, that didn't click. It's right there, so if you would just take a moment and look. There. Some tips for writing and education and careers. Y'all recognize him?
Rudy.
This is Rudy the character. 45 there is the real Rudy. Okay? Marianne, who was not here tonight, went to school with Rudy. And she says, Sean Austin looks a lot better than Rudy looked. She hates to be that kind of woman, but his real name is Rudy Rudiger, right? It's always too soon to quit. You want to be a writer, don't plan on quitting Thursday. It's all long ball. Next little thing. Come on, click. Start from yes, not from no. Oh, I saw this with students for years and years. I can't do that. Well, you haven't even tried yet. I know, but I can't do it. Well, you're right. You can't do it because you aren't going to try. Start from yes. The first draft doesn't need to be good. The first draft better not be good. It's a first draft. But you can revise, and you can revise. It just needs to be written. People tell me, oh, you're right. I've got 3 chapters of a novel. Do you want to see them? No. They're kind of shocked. I go, where's the other 20 chapters? Well, no. Get the first draft done. You'll feel so much better. It's so much easier. It takes longer to revise it. Remember the 2 commands that you teach your dog, first 2 things, sit and stay. You want to be a writer, you got to tell yourself, sit and stay. There's no getting around it. No one's going to write the book for you. No one's going to go to your computer and fill it up with wonderful chapters. You have to give yourself time for a project. You have to give yourself focus. Now, you got kids, you got businesses, you got spouses, you got elderly parents who are sick. Arrange your day you can write for an hour. I'm in communication with someone who was able to get 15 minutes in a day to write a novel. So I keep telling her, just keep at it. 15 minutes gets to be an hour, a couple hours, you start to have stuff and get that draft done. And you have to have belief that you will finish the project. So sit and stay. Failure is part of the process. The master has failed more times than the novice has tried. Most people give up. You know, if every time there's a bend in the road, you stop driving, you're not going anywhere. Next one. Don't think you're going to be perfect. Margaret Atwood, boy, the second she had a film of her book, right, Handmaid's Tale, the second one just won all these Emmys. If I waited for perfection, I would never write a word. You know, you've got to just jump in there and get it done. And you got to be kind of the village idiot to believe that really anybody's going to want to read this damn thing. You know, you just have to get in there and do it. That's a pep talk. Doesn't sound like one. Tip number 5. Mentally, you got to have a bit of an edge. Now, no one wants to see that edge. Externally, you need to be humble. Yeah, right, I enjoy it, you know. But in the back of your mind, you're going, I'm a killer. I just really, every time I write, I am smoking. But, you know, you got to have a bit of an edge, but you don't want that outside of yourself. But, you know, no one goes to the coach and says, put me in the coach. Or let me sit in the bench, coach. I'm really feeling it. You know, it's coach, I'm ready. Put me in, I'm going to kick. You know, no one goes around chanting, I'm number 2, I'm number 2. Mentally, you're number 1. You know, Marsco, I've already got the actors picked out who are going to play my characters in the movie. I just know this is going to happen. But no one likes a braggart, right? We elect them president, apparently, but no one really likes them. You know, you like a little bit of humility. So externally, I write, I love to write, I'm working on this. I wouldn't tell the plot, I would tell very little outside of I like to write, other than that. Oh, and you can always say, and I met a wonderful teacher, Zarzana explained all this stuff, he writes great books. You can say that. What's true in sports is true in life and in writing. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? You know that old joke? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? You practice, you practice, you practice. How do you get into the game? You practice, you practice, you practice. How do you write? You sit there and write, and you sit there and write, and you sit there and write. Don't think there's a shortcut. Couple more. The biggest problem with success is it looks easy. That was said by the head of the European Space Agency. When they landed the Philae on that comet, remember about 3 years ago? Well, yeah, 14, almost exactly 3 years ago. Sent 2 joint spacecrafts up to a comet. One circled the comet and one dropped down onto the surface of the comet. Think of the math and the science and the thousands of hours of people working on that. And all we do is watch the last 20 minutes and you go, oh, well, that was easy. You know, it always looks easy, but the background. So you're going to be successful, but you got to work. Get off Facebook and write that novel, as I say. The art of writing is the art of discovering what you believe. So it's work. You don't need to make a dime, but you're going to learn about yourself. And that might be, you know, worth the effort. Last couple ones, and I think I'm so funny. The sky is not the limit when there are footprints on the moon, just a reminder. Ray Bradbury, very successful. Well, right, how do you write? You go to a cliff, you jump off, you build wings on the way down, right? Always needed to put in some Harry Potter. Shouldn't you be writing now? So anyway, that's my talk. I gave you some, oh, I have one more handout. Here's homework. Where'd I put it? Here you go. I know a lot of this stuff is electronic now, but I list that I think you should have a good print dictionary, even though you can look everything up online. And I recommend, I don't own it, but the American Heritage to me is the best one going right now. A good print thesaurus, Roget's is still in print and is still very, very good. A style guide. Sometimes you want to know the nuance of certain words, especially if you're doing period writing and you want to check up on how things would have been used. Fowler's Dictionary of Modern English Usage. The Fowler's, there's a modern edition because it gets reprinted every couple of years. But you know, you go to somebody's garage sale and you see one, you know, some English professor's moving out of town and you see one stuck there for 50 cents, grab it. A modern grammar book, Little Brown is a good one, the St. Martin's. You can find those online too. But you should have these things in print. Don't run out and buy new ones, you know, but just keep your eye open when you go to a used bookstore or something. OWL is the online writing lab from Purdue University. It's so hard for me, a Notre Dame grad, to praise Purdue University, one of our big arch rivals.
Indiana University.
Okay.
You said the P word.
Yeah, I know. But the OWL, and there's all kinds of questions, you know, and if you have any business writing questions, there's a lot of stuff there too. And again, there's a Little Brown online I found. I would not totally rely on online sources. So if it's like you're doing something, you know, 18th century-ish, and Wikipedia can give you some good information. But a librarian will give, there's books about every one of these periods, what they dressed like, what they ate, all kinds of things. And if you want realism, you probably, you know, there's what did Jane Austen eat and Charles Dickens read or something. I mean, there's whole books about every period. And if they're not in a library like this, they're in a library like Southwest States because they have a reference section that has all kinds of stuff. There's books that are like decades. What was going on in the 70s? You have a character that's, you know, action is happening in 1972. You can sit and in an hour and a half read every major event happening in March 1971. You know, and so you can get some of this online, and I'm not disparaging the use of online sources. Whenever I have to spell a real person's name, I always check the spelling with Wiki. Anytime I need dates, I do a lot with World War I, and when was that battle, what was the general's name. Wiki, usually that stuff is very accurate. That doesn't, so I do use Wikipedia, but if you want thorough background, you need to come to a library, either here, Southwest, and you're doing a historical, like on the Prairie, the Minnesota Historical Society. There's all kinds of places where you need to sit and do a lot of research. You know, I invent everything, so it's just easy for me. I talked to Ken Murphy, our planetarium director, for this other novel I'm doing where they're going to travel faster than the speed of light. And I asked about dark energy and dark matter, and he just said, oh, hell, invent it. You're probably right anyway. We know so little about this stuff. You know, just go ahead and invent it. Well, so I get off the hook, but these other things, you know, if you want to be accurately portraying 1956, there's all kinds of resources about what 1956 was like. And so you can do that. And some of them, I would imagine most of what you read is not going to end up in the book. It would be boring if it did. It was just like, oh, and don't forget, they did this. And the first McDonald's opened in Sacramento. Who cares? Okay, I can stay and sign books if you want, or talk if you want to do things. If you have further questions that you didn't get to, unless there's a question.